Hi, this is János, it's Real World Audio, and finally we are now approaching to a really critical video series, this episode being the first episode of that, and namely how to improve your hearing. On my last video, Steve Will commented something really fantastic, requested about that, and he said, perhaps you have covered this elsewhere, but do you have tips and techniques to grow and improve hearing? I can see one maybe being to study the difference between the sound of an old system and the new one. Are there activities beyond A/B listening that you might suggest? Yes. So I really don't have anything planned out too much in the future. But I think probably it will be I'm thinking about at least a couple episodes, maybe like 6, 7, 8, maybe a dozen episode series of even more, probably maybe 2 dozen of sharing tips and tricks and advice that I have been practicing myself, that I received, that has helped me over the past decades to improve my hearing, and not just improve it, but when I had difficulties, that is hearing damage, hearing loss, how did I overcome it? And it was not just about recovering quite massive hearing damage, but getting quite a bit more discerning hearing than I had before the hearing damage. So I will share all of that in the coming episodes, and I will also talk about my mentors, Stu Ono, who helped me tremendously with that. So when I had myself really severe hearing damage that I suffered at work, he really helped me with recommendations on how to regain my lost hearing, and I was practicing his advice, and from being near deaf, I went to such a state that my hearing after that experience plus recovery, if I compare to what I had before the hearing damage, the before hearing damage was like nothing, almost nothing, like bare bones discerning capability. It's almost like a deaf person compared to what I have become due to the training. So I was saying this and sharing that because this is for all of you who have gone through partial hearing loss, that it's not the end of the world, that you can undo a lot of the damage. And that is because our hearing system is not just your ears, it's not like a mechanical device connected to your brain, but the majority of the hearing is the processing that the brain does. And when you have hearing damage, it means not just that the ear, that the transducer has some damage, but in most cases the damage is in the processor in your brain. And through practice, training, we can undo the damage that has happened to the processing centers or in the brain. And we can even get them, elevate them to a much higher state than were before. So I really recommend everyone to really tune in to these episodes, and I'm going to share about my hearing exercises and tips and tricks on how to improve your hearing and your listening skills, because they have helped me tremendously, they have helped my mentor tremendously, and the only time that these fail and they are not successful is when you are nearing the end of your life. That's what I have seen in my mentor, that the few months before his passing, that's when his health reached such a critical state that his hearing was irreversibly declining. But unless you are in this state that you are very much near death, then there is hope for you, and you can improve your hearing no matter where you are. And of course, the worse shape you are right now, the harder you have to work at it, but there is hope. And so that's my long-winded beginnings about hearing and how to improve them. So right now, in this opening episode about hearing, is my advice: don't even think about stereo right now. Focus 100% on yourself and to get to know how your hearing works. There are two types of hearing. So even though all of us are Homo sapiens, but it has been described by many, both in the scientific literature and also as a casual observation, that people have two types of hearing. And one type of hearing that is for the majority of people, and I don't know if this type of hearing has a name, but there is a subset of the human race who has so-called primitive hearing. So the first thing to just do anything about your hearing, to get to know yourself so you can improve, is find it out whether you have normal hearing or primitive hearing. I myself, I have primitive hearing. So what's the difference between the two? And why is primitive hearing called primitive hearing? And that's because there are different brain centers that process the sounds that we hear. And the primitive part of the brain is that has the lower centers, which are like evolutionary evolved earlier, that are more common in other animal species, and you can find them everywhere. Even a mouse has primitive hearing, and what that means is that that's part of the brain that is focused on localizing the sources of sounds. So when there's a snap or a drop or rustling sound, then the primitive part of your brain can really pick them out, and you form a soundscape in your brain, and you can almost visualize, even with closed eyes, what was the source of that rustling, where did that sound come from, and that's the primitive brain. That's the primitive part of the brain. And for those people who have primitive hearing, in those people, these brain centers that process the spatial information and the noises, this is the dominant brain center. And now there's a higher level processing center of the brain that processes speech. And this is something that's really overdeveloped in us, in Homo sapiens, when we compare it to chimpanzees or other primates. And that one allows us to pick up speech more easily. And how does that translate? Is that when you are in a noisy environment, if that part of your brain is predominant, which is focused on speech interpretation, basically it's speech analog processing, then your brain does a stunning job at picking up people talking when there is background noise. And when you have primitive hearing, then your brain focuses much more on picking up the individual noises compared to picking up the speech, what people are talking around you. So you can tell whether you have predominantly primitive hearing or evolved hearing. Just go to a party where is very loud noises around and people talking. Can you pick out what they are saying to you? And if it's easy for you to hear people, then you have this evolved hearing. If when you are in such an environment, like a noisy club or maybe a business meeting where you have like a dozen business partners talking to you, but it's a noisy restaurant and you know there's like noises all around, and there if you are distracted by the noises, then you have primitive hearing. And you are struggling to follow the communication between people. And in these instances, when you are with friends, then it becomes really obvious who has primitive hearing and who has evolved hearing. Those who have no trouble understanding each other, talking around, they have the evolved hearing. But those people, you will notice too, that they are quite oblivious about what's happening around them. So if there's a noise coming from tables all around, they don't notice it. So there's it's basically how it translates to is where we focus our attention and what sort of information we are getting from sound. And this translates to not just how you hear people, but how you hear noises and how your brain translates music. It has a fundamental impact on how you listen to your stereo, how you interpret the sound stage, how you interpret vocals that are coming through. So although people usually say that everyone hears the same thing, but that's not true. People who have primitive hearing versus evolved hearing, we hear things very, very differently, and we are very, very have consciousness of the music and parts of the music which are very different. And your first job is to identify which type is your hearing. Just get to know yourself, and when you find that, that will be your cornerstone that you can build on. And that will explain to you whether you will have really easy success learning certain aspects of the sound, how to tell different aspects, or it will be hard for you. So this is where we will continue with the next episode. Next part I will help share more about what's going on. If you have primitive hearing, how does it help you, and how you can develop your hearing. As I myself, I have primitive hearing, I will share predominantly what I have been doing as exercises for myself to improve my hearing. I cannot really say about what would be the best if you have the evolved hearing, because I have no personal experience of that. And as I have noticed, I think all of the audiophile friends of mine who have these extreme astute hearing, they all have primitive hearing. So if you found that you are struggling to grasp the audio qualities to describe the sound how it is, it's possibly because you have evolved hearing, and the brain and your brain is focusing on the speech, on translating what you hear to language, and your brain does not have the natural tendency to latch on to the details in the sound. And when you have primitive hearing, that's when your brain's natural mode of operation is to be obvious of the ambience around you, to the sounds, to the minute sonic events happening. So thank you for tuning in, and have an awesome day, and find out what's your hearing and who you are. Bye bye.